Every fighter pilot in history has had the same problem, and for 50 years, nobody solved it. When an aircraft attacks a target on the ground, it dives, fires, and pulls away. The pass lasts a few seconds. Everything the pilot can do, every round, every bomb, has to happen inside that window, because the aircraft is traveling at hundreds of kilometers an hour and the target is a fixed point on the Earth. Then the plane has to climb, turn, come around, reacquire, and do it all again. Between passes, the enemy has time. Time to move, time to shoot back, time to hide. Then somebody asked a question so simple it sounds almost stupid. What if the guns pointed sideways? That's it. That's the whole idea. Mount the weapons so they fire out of the left side of the aircraft, perpendicular to the direction of flight. Then put the aircraft into a steady, banked left turn, a pylon turn, around the target. The result is geometry that changes warfare. The aircraft flies in a circle, but the guns stay locked on the same patch of ground, indefinitely. Not a 3-second pass. A continuous stream of fire from one aircraft onto one point for as long as the ammunition lasts, which, aboard a transport plane, could be hours. This is why the AC-130 exists, and why the men beneath it dreaded it more than almost anything else in the American arsenal. It was not fast, it was not stealthy, it was a converted cargo aircraft, lumbering along at the speed of a light plane, and its entire terrifying quality came from one fact: it did not leave. It arrived over a target and stayed there, turning slow circles in the dark, firing. Now, before we go further, the honesty this channel runs on, because this video's title contains a claim that needs a small but important correction. The AC-130's war was not primarily fought against the Viet Cong. The gunship's main hunting ground was the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a road network running mostly through southern Laos, and its targets were overwhelmingly North Vietnamese army logistics, trucks, supply convoys, storage areas, and the anti-aircraft gunners protecting them. The men who feared the AC-130 most were not guerrillas in the rice paddies of the south. They were NVA truck drivers on a mountain road in a different country. There is, however, an aircraft whose reputation among the Viet Cong is documented in the enemy's own paperwork. Captured Viet Cong documents that told fighters not to attack the Dragon because their weapons were useless against it, and firing would only enrage it. That aircraft was the AC-130's direct ancestor, the AC-47, known to Americans as Spooky, and to everyone else as Puff the Magic Dragon. So this episode will deliver exactly what the title promises. But honestly, which means telling you which gunship terrified whom and why. Because the full story is better than the shorthand. It's the story of a 50-year-old idea that produced two different nightmares for two different enemies, and eventually became the most feared close support aircraft on Earth. Here's the route. First, the Dragon itself, the AC-47, the improvised gunship that went to war in 1965 with 3 miniguns and an idea, and did something almost no weapon system in history can claim. It defended thousands of outposts and hamlets, and no position it defended was ever overrun. That's where the Viet Cong nightmare genuinely lived, and where the enemy's own documents recorded their fear. Then the machine this video is named for. In September 1967, a converted C-130 arrived in South Vietnam, and the gunship stopped being an improvisation and became a weapons platform, bigger, longer-legged, and, Critically, carrying sensors nobody had ever put on a gunship before, including one that could find a truck by listening for its spark plugs through a jungle canopy. Then the trail. Operation Commando Hunt, from November 1968. 7 campaigns, thousands of nights, and a battle of attrition against the supply route that kept the war in the south alive. This is where the AC-130 earned its reputation. Over 10,000 trucks credited destroyed across the type service, and gunships in the best seasons killed more than 25 trucks in a single night. From the cockpit it was hunting. From the road it was something closer to horror. An invisible aircraft you could hear but not see, that found you in total darkness and did not go away. Then the cost, and the argument. Because 6 AC-130s were shot down, taking 52 aircrew with them. And the campaign those men died for is one of the most fiercely debated air operations in history. A tactical masterpiece that many historians consider a strategic failure. This series doesn't stand off endings, and this one has a hard one. But start with the geometry, because everything else follows from it. A circle, guns pointing inward, an aircraft that doesn't have to leave. In a war fought mostly at night, in the jungle, by men who moved supplies in the dark because the dark was the only safety they had. That circle was the end of safety. And the first version of that circle was built, almost as an afterthought, out of a 20-year-old transport plane. The aircraft that first terrified the Viet Cong was older than most of the men flying it. The C-47 Skytrain, the military DC-3, had carried paratroopers over Normandy, flown the hump into China, and supplied Berlin during the airlift. By the mid-1960s, it was a museum piece with a job. Slow, unpressurized, propeller-driven, utterly reliable. Exactly the wrong aircraft to build a weapon from, unless your weapon needed to fly slow circles for hours. Which it did. The conversion was almost crude. 3 7.62mm miniguns were mounted to fire out the left side, through the cargo door and adjacent windows, not in turrets, simply arranged to point sideways. The miniguns were the modern element, electrically driven rotary weapons firing thousands of rounds a minute, a volume no conventional machine gun could approach. The aircraft became the AC-47. The Air Force called it Spooky. The crews and everyone else called it Puff the Magic Dragon, after the song, because of what it looked like from the ground at night. That appearance matters more than any specification, so picture it. A minigun at that rate produces no distinguishable shots. Every 5th round or so is a tracer, and at thousands of rounds a minute, those tracers merge into a single continuous line. A solid red rope pouring out of the darkness onto the ground. The sound doesn't arrive as gunfire either, but as a roar, a tearing mechanical bellow with no gaps in it. So from a village in the dark, what you saw was an unseen thing circling above, breathing a stream of fire down into the earth, roaring while it did so. They called it a dragon because it looked like one. The tactical effect was catastrophic for anyone underneath. In a single orbit, an AC-47 could put a round into every square meter of a target area the size of a football pitch. There was no cover in the open, and no waiting it out either, because the aircraft carried enormous quantities of ammunition and could stay for hours. The entire point of building a gunship from a transport. The numbers from the earliest missions tell you how fast this changed the war. In one action on the 8th of February 1965, an AC-47 loitered over a Viet Cong attack for more than 4 hours and fired 20,500 rounds into the assaulting force, ending the attack. In its first 11 days of operations in Vietnam, the type fired nearly 180,000 rounds. By November 1965, the first full squadron, the 4th Air Commando Squadron, was operating out of Tan Son Nhut. And the mission that made the AC-130 legendary was defensive, not offensive. Across South Vietnam were thousands of isolated outposts, special forces camps, and defended hamlets, garrisons of a few dozen men, hours from relief, sitting in the dark. The standard Viet Cong method against such a position was the night attack. Mass in darkness, hit hard, overrun the perimeter before help arrives, be gone by dawn. It worked because it exploited the one thing nobody could fix: the hours between a radio call and the arrival of help. The gunship deleted those hours. A single AC-130 on call could arrive over a besieged outpost, light the area with flares, and wrap the perimeter in a wall of fire no infantry assault could cross, and keep doing it until dawn. Here is the claim that has followed the aircraft ever since, and it's an extraordinary one. Across the war, AC-130s are credited with defending somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 outposts and hamlets, and no position the gunship defended was ever overrun while it was on station. Treat that statistic with the care this series applies to perfect numbers. It comes from Air Force accounting, and any absolute claim across thousands of engagements deserves a raised eyebrow. But the underlying pattern isn't seriously disputed. The gunship broke the night attack as a tactic. That is why it matters far more than its modest technology suggests. And it's why the enemy's response was so telling. Because this is where the title of this video is literally, documentably true. Captured Viet Cong documents instructed fighters not to attack the Dragon. Their weapons were useless against it, and shooting would only enrage the creature. Read that as the military instruction it was. A professional insurgency assessing a new enemy weapon, concluding engagement was pointless, and formally telling its people to avoid it. It's the same institutional verdict this channel has found in other wars. An enemy quietly recording which capability not to fight. It is, in its way, the highest compliment the Viet Cong ever paid an aircraft. And note the wording: not shelter, not disperse, not fire from cover. The thing could not be hurt and should not be provoked. The AC-130 had one serious limitation, and it decided everything that came next. It was slow, short-legged, lightly armed by the standards of what was coming, and, above all, blind. It could pour fire onto a position friendly troops had marked or flares had lit. It could not find targets on its own, in darkness, under jungle canopy, in a country where nobody was calling for help, because nobody friendly was there. By 1967, that was exactly the problem the war had become. By 1967, the war America most needed to fight was invisible. Everything the North sent south, ammunition, rice, fuel, weapons, replacements, moved down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Not a road, but a system of tracks, bypasses, fords, truck parks and storage caves through the mountains of eastern Laos under canopy, mostly at night. Attacking it was the Central American air problem of the war, and conventional aircraft were badly suited to it. A fast jet over a jungle valley at night cannot see a truck, cannot linger, and cannot follow it. What the Air Force needed was a machine that could stay for hours, see in the dark, and shoot precisely. On the 21st of September 1967, The answer arrived in South Vietnam. A converted C-130, O Hercules, the Gunship 2 program, ancestor of every AC-130 flying today. Understand what the C-130 brought that the old Skytrain could not. 4 turboprops instead of 2 piston engines, vastly greater endurance and payload, and room for guns, ammunition, sensors, and the 10-plus crew to work them. It could fly from Thailand, spend hours over Laos, and come home. Carrying a weapons fit that escalated over 5 years into something without precedent. The early aircraft mounted 4 7.62mm miniguns and 4 20mm Vulcan cannons. Rotary weapons firing shells rather than rifle rounds, capable of tearing a truck apart. Then came upgrade programs, each adding weight of fire, 40mm Bofors cannons, a proven anti-aircraft gun turned downward, destroying vehicles with single rounds. And finally, in February 1972, the step that still sounds absurd when you say it plainly, they put a 105mm howitzer in an aeroplane. Read that again. A field artillery piece, the standard light howitzer of Western armies, firing out the side of a flying transport, loaded by hand in flight. The first arrived for Spectre service on the 17th of February 1972, on the gunship known as 570. In a single deployment, that aircraft's howitzer was credited with destroying 75 trucks and damaging 92 more, with dozens more by its 40mm fire, across 32 missions. But guns were never the revolution. Anyone can bolt weapons to an airframe. What made the AC-130 the most feared aircraft over the trail was that it could find you. The sensor suite was the true weapon, and it worked in layers. Low-light television amplified starlight into a usable picture. Infrared detected heat, a running engine, a hot exhaust, a truck that had stopped an hour ago and was still radiating. Side-looking radar mapped terrain. Beacon tracking lets friendly ground units mark themselves precisely. And a searchlight, including infrared modes invisible to the naked eye, could illuminate a target for men wearing the right equipment while leaving everyone else in the dark. And then there was Black Crow, formerly the AN/ASD-5. Black Crow was one of the strangest sensors ever fielded, and the one that gave the AC-130 its aura of the supernatural. It was passive. It emitted nothing, so it could not be detected. And it listened for the electromagnetic signature of unshielded truck ignition systems. In plain terms, it could find a Soviet-built truck under triple canopy jungle, at night in cloud, by detecting the spark plugs firing in its engine. Think about what that meant to the man driving that truck. He was doing everything right, driving at night because daylight belonged to the Americans, under the canopy because the canopy was covered, lights off or shielded, engine quiet. Every precaution the war had taught him, correctly applied, and above him an aircraft he could not see and could not hear over his own engine, was reading his spark plugs through the trees and had been tracking him for kilometers. There was no error to correct because he had made none. That is what separates the AC-130 from every other threat on that road. It did not punish carelessness, it punished existence. Put the whole system together and you have the machine this video is about. An aircraft that arrives unseen at altitude, finds you through the canopy with sensors that need no light, holds a slow pylon, turn overhead, and fires everything from rifle rounds to artillery shells. A fire control computer solving the geometry so rounds land where the sensors look. Sustained, precise, unhurried. By the 30th of October 1968, enough gunships had arrived to form a full squadron, the 16th Special Operations Squadron, based at Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base in Thailand. The call sign, and eventually the aircraft's name, became Spectre. It was well chosen. A Spectre is something present but unseen, arriving uninvited, unfightable by ordinary means. That is exactly what those aircraft were to the men on the trail below. A presence in the dark that could not be seen, could not reliably be shot at, and knew where you were. And they were about to be turned loose on the busiest supply road on Earth. In November 1968, the 7th Air Force in Saigon launched the campaign that would define the AC-130's war and consume it. 7 separate operations, timed to the wet and dry seasons of Laos, running from 1968 until 1972. Its name was Commando Hunt. For 4 years, the gunship and the truck driver fought the most repetitive and bitterly contested duel of the entire air war. The campaign began on the 11th of November, 1968, and its logic was brutally simple. If the supplies could not reach the South, the war in the South would starve. Commando Hunt ran in 7 campaigns to 1972, each timed to the Laotian seasons. The dry season campaigns were the killing ones, when the roads hardened and the trucks ran nightly. The wet season campaigns fought mud and clouds as much as the enemy. Across all of them, the AC-130 was the most effective truck-killing machine the United States possessed. The numbers are staggering, and the final chapter will interrogate them. But here they are as the Air Force recorded them. Across the type service, AC-130s were credited with destroying more than 10,000 trucks. In the peak 1970 to 71 dry season, a single gunship could account for more than 25 trucks in a night. Across 4 dry season campaigns, the Air Force reported some 46,000 trucks destroyed or damaged by all committed air forces. One specially modified gunship of the Surprise Package program was credited with around 800 trucks before being shot down. That is what the campaign looked like from the American side, an industrial-scale hunt, run night after night, with the gunship as the apex predator. Now cross the lines, because this video is about a nightmare, and nightmares belong to the people having them. You are a North Vietnamese driver, perhaps 19. Your truck is a Soviet-built lorry, canvas-covered, carrying rice, ammunition, or fuel drums. Your job is to move it a set distance down the trail tonight, hand it off, and be undercover by dawn. You have done this many times. Men you trained with have not come back from it. You drive with lights off or hooded, guided by markers, and often by soldiers walking ahead in the dark. The road is a tunnel of foliage, deliberately maintained so the canopy meets overhead. You know the aircraft are up there. Everyone knows. You have heard the 4-engine drone before. A slow, grinding sound, unlike the jets, that circles rather than passes. And here is the particular terror of this weapon. The sound gives you no information. A jet's noise tells you it has already gone by. Artillery gives you a warning shriek. A gunship's drone tells you only that it is somewhere above, circling, over you, or 2 valleys away, or tracking someone else, or tracking you and waiting for a clean picture. You cannot see it. You cannot know. And nothing you do, slow, fast, stopping, Sheltering under the thickest canopy you can find reliably helps, because the sensor that found you was never looking with light. Then the first rounds arrive. They arrive before any sound of firing, because the aircraft is more than a kilometre up and the shells outrun their own noise. The first indication is the road exploding. Then the guns catch up, heavy, deliberate thumps of 40mm fire, the buzzing roar of the Vulcans, or after 1972, the unmistakable crash of a howitzer fired from the sky. And then it doesn't stop. That is the essential thing. Bombing you survives by surviving one pass. The gunship keeps turning its circle, sensors locked, walking fire down a stalled column, one vehicle at a time, for as long as it chooses to stay. Drivers who abandoned their trucks and ran into the trees were doing the only sensible thing available. And even that worked, only if the aircraft preferred the vehicles to the men. This was not a battle. It was a machine dismantling a supply line in the dark, night after night, for years. But, and this is where the honest account has to turn, the men underneath were not passive. They fought back, and they were extremely good at it. The trail became one of the most heavily defended pieces of ground in the history of air warfare. Anti-aircraft artillery arrived along the routes in enormous quantities. 23, 37, and 57mm guns, radar directed in places, dug in to cover the choke points where gunships had to orbit. And a gunship in a pylon turn is, by definition, doing the one thing that helps a gunner most: flying a predictable circular path at a known altitude, staying in one place, and lighting itself up every time it fires. The enemy also learned to bait, positioning vehicles to draw a gunship into a prepared box of anti-aircraft guns. Then, from 1972, surface-to-air missiles reached the trail, including the shoulder-fired SA-7, a weapon one soldier could carry into the jungle and use against a slow aircraft at altitude. The AC-130's defense was arithmetic and nerve, higher orbits, tighter turns, terrain masking, escort suppressing the guns, and always the acceptance that the aircraft's greatest strength, its willingness to stay, was exactly what made it killable. That bill came due. 6 AC-130s were shot down during the Vietnam War, 4 of them in 1972 alone, as the defences thickened. 52 aircrew were lost with them. Among the losses was the AC-130A, named Warlord, hit by 37mm anti-aircraft fire over southern Laos on the 22nd of April 1970. 52 men in an aircraft type most people today associate with invulnerability. That is the other half of the nightmare. And it belonged to the crews. Now the hard part, because this channel doesn't stop at impressive numbers: 10,000 trucks, 46,000 destroyed or damaged across 4 dry season campaigns, 25 kills in a night. Those figures are real in the sense that they were genuinely recorded by the United States Air Force, and they are among the most disputed statistics of the entire Vietnam War. Here's the problem, and it isn't small. Battle damage assessment at night, from a kilometre up, through canopy, in a firefight, is extraordinarily difficult. A truck that catches fire is a kill. A truck that stops moving may be killed, a driver taking cover, or an already destroyed hulk being hit again. Crews assessed through sensors, in the dark, under fire, with every incentive pointing one way. Because in an interdiction campaign, the truck count was the metric. It measured whether the operation was working. It justified sorties, budgets, and risk. And when a number becomes the definition of success, that number reliably grows. The scale of the doubt shows in a comparison historians have made for decades. Totals claimed in some campaigns approach or exceed reasonable estimates of how many trucks North Vietnam possessed or could obtain. When claimed kills rival the enemy's entire inventory, something in the accounting is wrong. Most serious analysts conclude the true figures were substantially lower, while still accepting that the AC-130 was, by a wide margin, the most efficient truck killer in the theatre. And here is the larger, colder judgment. The supplies got through. That is the verdict on the interdiction campaign as a whole, and it's why academic studies of Commando hunt carry titles containing the word failure. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was never closed. Traffic was slowed and made vastly more expensive in men and machines, but the North absorbed the loss, widened the network, built bypasses, moved at night, repaired by day with tens of thousands of laborers, and kept sending. In 1972, the North Vietnamese launched the Easter Offensive with armored divisions, tanks, artillery, the heavy equipment of conventional war, down the very route the campaign had spent 4 years trying to sever. So the honest summary of the AC-130's Vietnam War is a genuinely uncomfortable one, and it deserves to be said in a single sentence. It was a tactically superb weapon serving a strategically failed campaign. Both halves are true, and this series won't drop either. The gunship really was extraordinary. On any given night, on any stretch of road, it did what it was built to do better than anything else in the sky. And no amount of tactical excellence could deliver a strategic result the campaign's premise couldn't support. Because a supply route with enough people, time, and political will behind it cannot be closed from the air. That lesson was learned at a cost of 6 aircraft and 52 American aircrew, and relearned by other air forces in other wars afterwards. Which brings us back to the question in the title, now answerable properly. Was the AC-130 the Viet Cong's worst nightmare? Strictly no, and the correction matters. The gunship that haunted the Viet Cong was the AC-47. The Dragon their own captured documents warned fighters not to provoke, the aircraft that broke the night attack on isolated outposts across South Vietnam. That is the documented, enemy-attested nightmare, and it belongs to Puff. The AC-130's nightmare belonged to somebody else, the North Vietnamese logistician, the anti-aircraft crew, and above all, the 19-year-old truck driver on a mountain road in Laos, doing everything correctly, being tracked by his spark plugs. If you want the honest version of this video's title, it is this. The AC-130 was the worst nightmare of the men who kept the Viet Cong alive. And that is arguably the bigger claim. Guerrillas can be replaced from the population. Ammunition cannot be conjured. The gunship went after the one thing the insurgency could not manufacture locally, with such efficiency that the North committed anti-aircraft regiments, road crews, and whole logistics divisions simply to keep moving. The aircraft outlived the war that made it. The AC-130 line runs unbroken from those Vietnam gunships through Spectre, Spooky, and today's Ghost Rider. The same concept with better sensors, precision munitions, and the same 105mm howitzer that first flew in February 1972. It has flown over Panama, Iraq, Somalia, Afghanistan, and Syria. When American troops on the ground are surrounded at night, the aircraft they want overhead is still the one that turns in a circle and does not leave. That continuity is the real measure of the idea we started with. Not the disputed truck counts, not the folklore. The fact that a solution invented for a war America lost, guns pointing sideways, an aircraft that stays, has proven so sound it has served for 60 years, with no better answer found. 52 men died proving it worked. The trucks kept rolling anyway. Both of those sentences belong on the same page, and any account that gives you only one of them is selling you something. That's the ledger. The machine was magnificent. The campaign was not. And somewhere on a road in southern Laos, a young man heard a slow drone circling in the dark and understood, correctly, that doing everything right was not going to be enough.